What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're going to start our series on learning to use the free version of SketchUp. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so to access the free version of SketchUp, you can just go to SketchUp.com, and then on the front page, if you click on Start Your Free Trial, you go to Personal Projects, and you click on SketchUp Free, Start Modeling. That'll take you to the free version of SketchUp. An easier way to get there is just to type in app.sketchup.com, and that'll take you to the free version. Now, you're going to have a free Trimble account in order to do this. When you click on I agree, it should take you to a page where you can do that. In this case, I've got an older version of a model that was in here, but I'm going to go ahead and click in here, and you should get a page that looks like this. We can click on Start Modeling. So once you pop this up, and this is with the free version right here, notice how you have the option to fly around in this three-dimensional space. And if there's a little box on the top right here, you can just click on it, not on the link, and it'll go away. But what this is going to do is this is going to give you access to the free version of SketchUp. So you've got multiple different areas inside of the free online version of SketchUp. So you've got your 3D workspace where you're going to go in to actually draw things. You've got your toolbars on the left-hand side of the page. This is where you're going to access various different tools for doing things like drawing in SketchUp. So more on that in a second. You've got your other toolbars on the right-hand side of the page. This is going to give you access to different things like your entity info window, where you can find out more information about the entity that you have selected. You can also find things like components that are in your model, other things like that. Notice how these are going to pop out when you click on them, right? So if you click on these little buttons right here, they're going to pop out a little window. It's going to give you access to various different things. So you've got all of this. Over here on the upper left-hand side, you've got the area where you're actually going to create and manage your model. So if you click on the little hamburger menu right here, notice how that's going to give you a lot of the things you would expect to have in a file or a file window or a file toolbar when you work on the desktop version of something. So like your save as, your open, other things like that. One thing to note about this is most of your files are getting saved online in the cloud inside of something called Trimble Connect. So if you want to save a model, you just click on the little hamburger menu right here, set it to save as, and you can pick a location. And notice how this is going to be kind of a cloud-based location. And then at the bottom of the page, you've got a toolbar that shows you things like instructions for how to use the tool that's currently selected. So currently I have the select tool selected, and it says, okay, to use this tool, you're going to click and drag in order to select objects like this. So you see how there's instructions here. There's information about things like the language, your input device over here. And then on the right-hand side, there's a measurements bar, which is going to be kind of a companion to any tools that you have active inside of the 3D space. So it's going to show you things like length. So if I was to draw a line right here, notice how that bar or that box is going to show you the length of the line that you currently have active. Okay, so now that you're kind of oriented, let's talk a little bit about how you can fly around in the 3D space. Okay, and so over here, you've got access to some different tools for moving around. The two most common ways that you're going to move around in the 3D space are orbiting and panning. And so you can click on this button right here. That's going to activate the orbit tool. Well, then you can click and drag in order to fly around in this three-dimensional space like this. You can also click on the pan tool, and then you can click and move around inside of the three-dimensional space like this. Now, notice that all of these tools have a letter next to them. The letter indicates that that's the keyboard shortcut that you can use to activate the tool. So in this case, though, we don't want to use either one of those letters. What we want to do instead is we want to use our mouse. And so you should have a mouse that's a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel. And what a lot of people don't realize is with that scroll wheel, it's actually going to also act as a button. So if you click and hold that scroll wheel, you're going to be able to orbit around in the three-dimensional space. So most of the way that we're going to move around is actually going to be using the mouse and keyboard shortcuts. Now, another thing that you can do in the three-dimensional space is you can scroll your mouse up and down. And by doing that, this is going to zoom in or zoom out based on your cursor location. So if I move my cursor over this model and scroll my mouse wheel up, notice what that's going to do is that's going to scroll me in and out based on this mouse location. So you can zoom in and out using that scroll wheel. Now, one of the things that you're going to want to go ahead and learn is you can also modify what that does. by holding a key on your keyboard. So right now I'm clicking and holding my middle mouse button. But if I'm clicking and holding my middle mouse button and I hold the shift key like this, notice how now I can pan inside of the 3D workspace. So now I'm doing all of this using just one keyboard shortcut and the middle mouse button. Then when I let up on it, we go back into the orbit tool. So most of your moving around is going to be zooming, panning, zooming again, panning again, and orbiting like this. So that's a general way that you can navigate around in the 3D space. I recommend zooming into different parts of this model just so you can kind of get familiar with navigating around to places you actually want to go to. And so let's say that we wanted to draw a line. Well, the way that you can do that is either by coming over here and clicking on this button right here, or by tapping the L key on your keyboard. Now is as good of a time as any for you to start using keyboard shortcuts, because they're going to make your life a lot simpler. So if you tap the L key on your keyboard, that's going to activate the line tool. Now, notice how when I activated the line tool, this gave me a series of instructions over here on this page on what to do with the line tool. So in this case, it says to click and set your first endpoint. So I'm going to single click. Notice I'm not clicking and dragging, by the way. That's something you need to learn early. We don't really click and drag in order to activate tools. Instead, what we do is we single click, we move our mouse, and then we click again in order to place something like a line. So don't click and drag, single click, move your mouse, and then click again. And so what I can do is I can click on a point somewhere. And notice how if I move my mouse over certain things, I get this little dot that shows up in here. That's an inference point. And that is SketchUp's engine trying to help you figure out where you might want to draw something inside of the 3D space. So if you wanted to draw a line that started on this origin point right here, you would just click on this point. Now I'm going to move my mouse off to the side a little bit so you can see this line better. But if I single click, notice how this draws a line from wherever one point is to another point, like this. And one of the things you're going to notice is this line turns colors. And so, like, notice how if I move this in this direction, it turns green. That's SketchUp's engine helping you know that you're drawing along the green axis, right? You're drawing in the green direction, like this. But say that I move my mouse and click again, I've drawn a line. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice in here is this tool stays active. So right now, if I click again, it's going to draw another line as many times as I click, like this. Now, the best way that I've found to toggle out of a tool once you've drawn something is to tap the space key. What the space key does is it activates the select tool, but it also effectively turns off the tool that you're using. But now let's say that we wanted to draw a line that's a certain length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my mouse over here, and let's say that I want this line to be 6 feet long. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my mouse in the direction that I want this to be drawn. I'm going to type in a value of 6 feet and hit the enter key. So 6 and then the feet sign and hit the enter key. Now notice how when I did that, I don't need to come over here and click inside of this box. We never click in this box. It's just something that's active as we go, right? So if I wanted this to be like another 3-foot line in this direction, I'm just going to type in a value of 3 feet like this, but I never have to actually click in the box in order to add a length like this. And so another thing that you should learn right from the beginning is how to use this inferencing. So drawing on the actual directions in SketchUp, so the red, blue, and green directions is going to be really important because of the way that SketchUp creates faces, which we'll talk more about later. But like say, for example, I wanted to draw a flat face like this, I need to draw all of these edges on the same plane in order to make this flat. Well, the easiest way to do that is going to be by once you click, you can either move your mouse in a direction and then hold the shift key in order to lock that inference. So notice how I'm holding shift, and as soon as I hold the shift in a certain direction, it's going to lock it to that direction. So no matter where I move my mouse, it's only going to draw in that direction. So that's one way to do this. The other way to do this is when you add your first point in here, if you tap the left, right, or up arrow keys, that's going to lock you to a direction in SketchUp. So what I can do is I can set a base point like this. I can tap the left arrow key, and then I can move my mouse wherever I want, and it's going to draw in this direction like this. So go ahead and draw a 10-foot line in the green direction. Draw another 10-foot line in the blue direction. And then draw another 10-foot line in the red direction, just so that you're familiar with drawing these lines in here. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about creating faces in SketchUp, because this is really important because that's most of what's going to make up your models. So notice how if I draw 3 lines like this, as soon as I close this shape in, as long as these edges are all in the same plane, right? As long as they're flat, SketchUp creates a face. So that's the way that SketchUp works, is it closes in faces on coplanar edges. So if I draw a bunch of edges in here and then I close this in, as soon as you close in a shape like this, it's going to create a face based on those coplanar edges. And so let's say I drew a face like this one. Now notice it's made up of 4 edges, right? But the problem with this shape is even though it's made up of 4 edges, no 3 of them are coplanar and closed, right? So notice what we have right here is we have an empty shape right here and an empty shape right here. Now, notice what happens if we draw a line across right here. Both of these faces fill in because suddenly I have 3 coplanar edges here, 3 coplanar edges here. So the concept of coplanar edges is really important, and that's also why drawing and inferencing is really important, because say that you were to just kind of draw in the 3D space, and let's say you accidentally drew an edge like this one that was just slightly up, right? Now, if I was to try to close in this shape, notice how it's not going to work. And that's because these edges aren't actually coplanar. And that actually got worse than I expected it to, but it's still a really good example because, so if I draw a shape like this one and try to close it in, those edges aren't actually coplanar, so your face isn't going to draw on this surface. So that's why making sure when you're drawing and using that inferencing is going to be really important. So as long as I'm drawing on the red and green axes, I know that this is going to create a face when I fill this in. Now, another thing to be aware of is if you ever have a face go away. So say you lose an edge like this one, and by the way, you can erase that edge by activating the eraser tool, by tapping the E key or by clicking over here. And notice how when I click and drag in here with the eraser tool doesn't actually erase faces. The eraser tool erases edges. But if I erase this edge out right here, notice how that face goes away. Well, if that face goes away, I can heal it by just redrawing across this face. And as long as these edges are all coplanar, it's going to fill in the face here. So if you ever have a situation where you have a face that goes away and you know your edges are coplanar, you can actually just draw over one of the edges and it'll bring the face back in. Okay, now there are also tools for creating things more like shapes. So for example, I've got this rectangle tool over here. So if I mouse over this to draw a rectangle, notice how this gives me a different shape. So in this case, if I single click and move my mouse, notice how over in the lower right hand corner, I'm actually getting 2 dimensions. So with the rectangle tool, what you can do is you can move your mouse and then you can type in 2 dimensions. So say I typed in 8 feet, 8 feet, and hit the enter key, it's actually going to draw a rectangular shape that's going to be 8 feet by 8 feet. Now there are other shapes in here. So if you click on the 3 dots right here, you can see them. So for example, you've got circles, you've got polygons, other tools like that. So, or you're just going to activate those with keyboard shortcuts. But if I single click and move my mouse here, I can draw a circle inside of this 3D space like this. So you can either draw your shapes manually or you can use those tools in order to draw things like the circles. Notice how those recently used tools are going to show up over here on the left-hand side like this, but after 3 of them, they're going to get kind of replaced over here. So just know your most recent 3 tools are going to show up in this list over here, or in the toolbar over here on the left-hand side. And you can also reorder these tools in here if you want to. Honestly, I don't use the toolbars all that much because I use keyboard shortcuts. But now let's talk a little bit about going to 3D. So let's say that we wanted not just a box like these, but we wanted a box that's a little bit bigger that's actually 3D. And by the way, notice how I'm getting these little dots that come off of these edges right here. That's inferencing, and that's SketchUp trying to guess how you might want to model inside of this 3D space. Well, notice how, for example, if I was to mouse over this corner and then move my mouse off of this edge, this is actually going to give me a little bit of an inference line over here. That inference line is indicating to me, okay, if I was to draw a point right here, this is going to be aligned with this point over here. Well, notice if I move my mouse, I'm actually getting more inferencing. Well, I can mouse over this edge right here, and I can move my mouse this way in order to draw a rectangle that's the same size as this shape right here. But now, let's take this to 3D. And so the majority of the way that you're going to take things to 3D is going to be using a tool called the push-pull tool. What the push-pull tool does is it takes an object and it extrudes it to 3D. And so let me show you how that works. So let's say we wanted this to be a box and we were to try to draw this into a three-dimensional box. We can do this. By the way, notice if you click on this point right here, what I would do to make these lines the same length is I would move my mouse up until I get that blue line, and then I would mouse over this one right here, and I would click, and I would click. But notice how I could come in here using that method and just model out all of those faces in order to create a box. And so it's a lot of work, but you could do it, right? So this gives me a complete box inside of the three-dimensional space. Well, a much easier way to do this would be to activate this tool called the push-pull tool, which you can activate by tapping the P key on your keyboard. Well, what that does is that's going to allow you to extrude an object to 3D. And notice how, again, I can type in a value. So if I type in a value of 6 feet and hit the enter key, that's going to extrude this up 6 feet in the three-dimensional space. And notice you can extrude multiple different kinds of shapes. So I can extrude this cylinder to 3D as well. And one of the things we do, and this is another reason why not clicking and dragging is important. What we want to do is single click. Well, now if I move my mouse up, I can either type in a value, I can click, or I can mouse over something else. So notice how if I mouse over this face, it's going to extrude this object up so that it's the same height as this face right here. And so let's draw another shape. So in this case, I'm going to tap the R key on my keyboard, but I want this rectangle to stand up. Now you might have noticed if you activate a tool like the rectangle tool and you mouse over faces like this, it's going to kind of like inference to that direction. Well, then you could hold the shift key in order to lock it to that direction, but it's not really my favorite way of doing this. What you can do instead is you can activate the rectangle tool by tapping the R key, and you can lock that tool to a direction by tapping the left, right, or up arrow keys. And so in this case, I'm going to tap R, tap left, and then I'm going to mouse over this corner and move my mouse over. Well, notice how that allows me to draw a shape that's standing up like this. So I can draw a standing up rectangle. Well, now let's say that I wanted to extrude this out to be the same length as this other object. I would just tap the P key, single click on this face, and then mouse over this corner right here. Now, one of the things that I want you to be aware of, and this is where the push-pull tool actually gets really powerful, is you can actually use this in order to remove material as well. So say that I was to draw an arc along this corner. So I'm going to tap the A key on my keyboard in order to activate the arc tool. Well, notice how if I single click, then I move my mouse, and I single click again, or I actually had to double click in order to place that. What I've done is I've split this face out by drawing over top of it. Well, one of the things I can do is I can use the push-pull tool. So if I activate the push-pull tool and then mouse over this, notice how I can single click and move my mouse right here. That's going to remove material from this object like this. And notice how if I click right here, it's going to keep this face. But if I push-pull this all the way to the back, like this, notice how it's going to tell me the offset is limited, but if I click, it's going to remove this additional material right here. So say that I was to use the rectangle tool and just draw a little rectangle on the surface like this. Again, notice how when I drew across this face, it's splitting this face up because I drew across this raw face. Well, now if I activate the push-pull tool and push-pull this all the way back, that's going to add a recess to this object. Now, You can also use this to cut holes in objects. So if I activate the circle tool by tapping the C key, single click and move my mouse, and then click again, well, if I pull this all the way to the back, you can kind of see it. If I rotate, we'll rotate around to the back side. And by the way, notice how with tools active, if you click and drag the orbit tool using the middle mouse button on your keyboard, tools are going to remain active. So you can start doing something with a tool, then click and drag with the middle mouse button, then this is going to remain active. Well, then I can move my mouse and I can click on this back face. Well, when I do that, notice how that's going to cut a hole in the back side of this object. Now, say we wanted this to be narrower, I could pull this entire face back like this in order to give me this little shape right here. And so this gets extremely valuable for doing things like, say you were to create a wall with some thickness. Well, you can use that tool in order to add things like door and window openings as well. So I could just draw those openings on the face right here, pull to the back, and this is going to cut an opening in that wall. All right, so that should give you a good idea of how to start drawing in SketchUp free. We'll get more in depth in the videos coming up, but if you do have any questions about anything we talked about in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.